My business partner sold our secrets for $400,000, then begged me not to press charges. My business partner of 8 years looked me dead in the eye and said, "I've been selling our client list to Henderson and Associates for the past 2 years. The partnership is dissolved, effective immediately." Then he walked out of our conference room like he'd just announced the weather. 3 weeks later, he was begging me not to press charges. Here's how a decade of friendship and business partnership crumbled in a single afternoon. Let me take you back to where this all began. Picture a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Denver, circa 2016, where Jake Morrison and I were both struggling freelance graphic designers sharing overpriced rent and surviving on ramen noodles. I'm Daniel Chen, 28 at the time, recently laid off from a corporate design job that sucked my soul dry. Jake was 30, charismatic as hell, and had this infectious energy that made you believe anything was possible. We'd met at a networking event where we bonded over our shared hatred of pretentious creative directors and our dreams of running our own shop. Within 3 months, we'd formed Morrison Chen Creative, a partnership built on handshake agreements and naive optimism. I handled the technical side, web design, coding, project management. Jake was our face, client relations, sales, creative direction. It seemed like the perfect combination. Our first office was a converted garage behind Jake's girlfriend's house. We painted the walls bright orange, bought secondhand furniture from Facebook Marketplace, and hung a banner that read, "Where Ideas Come to Life," in Comic Sans font because we thought it was ironically hilarious. Looking back, that banner was more prophetic than we knew, just not in the way we intended. The early years were brutal but exhilarating. We worked 80-hour weeks, survived on gas station coffee, and celebrated every small victory like we'd won the lottery. Our first $10,000 month felt like reaching the summit of Everest. By year 3, we'd moved into a real office downtown, hired 2 junior designers, and were pulling in 6 figures annually. Jake had this way of making clients fall in love with him within minutes of meeting. He'd remember their kids' names, ask about their golf games, and somehow make designing a brochure feel like the most important creative endeavor in human history. Meanwhile, I kept the trains running on time, made sure deadlines were met, and turned Jake's wild creative visions into functional reality. Our partnership agreement was embarrassingly informal, basically a 1-page document we'd printed from a legal template website. We split everything 50-50. Profits, losses, responsibilities, and headaches. It worked because we trusted each other completely. Jake would make decisions about new clients while I was coding, and I'd allocate resources without consulting him. We finished each other's sentences and could communicate complex project changes with a single look across the office. By 2022, Morrison Chen Creative had grown into something we'd never imagined. 15 employees, a client roster that included 3 Fortune 500 companies, and annual revenue pushing $2.8 million. We'd moved into a converted warehouse space with exposed brick walls, sliding glass conference rooms, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a tech startup. Jake drove a BMW, I bought my first house, and we were both living the entrepreneurial dream we'd sketched out on napkins 7 years earlier. The warning signs were subtle at first, the kind of things you notice but dismiss because everything else is going so well. Jake started taking more solo meetings with clients, claiming it was more efficient than both of us being there. He'd return from these meetings with signed contracts and exciting news about expanded project scopes, but something about his energy felt different. Less collaborative, more secretive. The first real crack in our foundation appeared during a staff meeting in March 2024. Sarah Kim, our lead designer, mentioned that Henderson and Associates had pitched remarkably similar concepts to 3 different clients she'd heard about through industry contacts. Henderson was our biggest competitor in Denver, led by Richard Henderson, a smooth-talking former advertising executive who ran his agency like a corporate machine. "It's probably just coincidence," Jake said quickly, but I caught something in his voice that made my stomach tighten. Great minds think alike, right? But Sarah wasn't convinced. "Daniel, remember that campaign we developed for Mountain Peak Brewery? The one with the vintage skiing theme and the tagline, 'Slopes and Hops'?" Henderson pitched almost the exact same concept to Craftsman Brewery 2 weeks after we presented it. The room went quiet. Our employees were looking between Jake and me, waiting for an explanation that neither of us could provide. I felt that familiar knot in my chest that appears whenever you know something is wrong but can't quite identify what. "I'm sure it's just industry trends," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Sometimes concepts just feel like they're in the zeitgeist, you know?" After the meeting, I pulled Jake aside in his office. The space was quintessentially him: expensive leather furniture, awards covering one wall, and a putting green in the corner where he'd practiced during phone calls. He was rearranging papers on his desk with unnecessary intensity, avoiding eye contact. "Jake, what's going on with Henderson? Sarah's not wrong about those similarities." He looked up with that trademark smile that had charmed hundreds of clients over the years. "Danny boy, you're being paranoid. Henderson's got a team of 20 designers. Sometimes people come up with similar ideas. It happens." But I knew Jake well enough to recognize when he was performing rather than conversing. The easy familiarity that had defined our friendship for nearly a decade felt forced, like he was following a script rather than talking to his best friend and business partner. Over the following weeks, I found myself paying closer attention to things I'd previously taken for granted. Jake's calendar was increasingly filled with external meetings that weren't connected to any clients I recognized. He'd started locking his office when he left, something he'd never done before. Most concerning, he seemed to be documenting everything, taking photos of project boards, making copies of client files, and asking unusually specific questions about our processes and pricing structures. The confrontation I'd been dreading finally happened on a Thursday afternoon in April. I'd arrived at the office early to catch up on coding work when I noticed Jake's computer was still logged in from the previous day. His email was open, and sitting right there in his sent folder was a message to Henderson and Associates with the subject line, "April Delivery, Client Intelligence Package." My hands were shaking as I clicked on the email. What I found made my blood run cold. Jake had compiled detailed dossiers on 12 of our biggest clients, including contact information, project histories, budget ranges, personal details about decision-makers, and strategic insights we'd gathered through months of relationship building. He'd essentially created a roadmap for Henderson to poach our entire client base. The email trail went back 18 months. Jake had been systematically feeding our competitor intelligence on our clients, our pricing, our creative processes, and our business strategies. In exchange, he was receiving monthly payments of $15,000, plus bonuses for successful client acquisitions. By my rough calculation, he'd made over $400,000 selling out the company we'd built together. I printed everything, saved copies to a secure drive, and then sat in my office staring at the evidence while trying to process what I discovered. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a desperate move during hard times. It was a calculated, sustained betrayal that had been happening for nearly 2 years while I'd been treating him as my most trusted friend and business partner. When Jake arrived at the office around 10 a.m., I was waiting in our conference room with the printed emails spread across the table like evidence in a crime scene. He walked in with his usual morning coffee and cheerful greeting, but stopped mid-sentence when he saw the papers. "We need to talk," I said, and for the first time in our 8-year partnership, Jake looked genuinely afraid. He sat down across from me at the conference table where we'd celebrated countless victories, planned expansion strategies, and solved hundreds of business challenges together. But now that same table felt like a barrier between two strangers rather than a meeting place for partners. "Danny, I can explain," he started, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Jake, I've read everything. 18 months of emails. The client intelligence packages. The payment records. The strategic information you've been feeding to Henderson. I know exactly what you've been doing, so please don't insult me by pretending this is some misunderstanding." His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally something that looked like relief. Like a part of him had been waiting for this moment, tired of carrying the weight of his deception. "You're right," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I've been working with Henderson. They approached me 2 years ago with an offer I couldn't refuse." The casual way he admitted it hit me harder than any elaborate excuse would have. No shame, no remorse, just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement that he'd been systematically betraying our partnership for money. "An offer you couldn't refuse? Jake, we were pulling in $2.8 million annually. You were making more money than either of us ever dreamed possible. What could Henderson offer that was worth destroying everything we built?" He shrugged, and that gesture contained more disrespect than any insult he could have thrown at me. "They offered me a partnership track and equity in a larger operation. Henderson and Associates is positioning themselves for acquisition by a national firm. I could be looking at a $5 million payout within 3 years." The calculation behind his betrayal was breathtaking in its coldness. While I'd been working 70-hour weeks to grow our company, He'd been positioning himself for an exit strategy that involved selling our secrets to the highest bidder. So all of this, I gestured around the conference room, at the company we'd built from nothing, was just a stepping stone for you? The partnership, the friendship, the trust, none of it meant anything. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something that might have been guilt cross his face. Danny, you have to understand. We were never going to be more than a mid-sized regional firm. Henderson has connections, resources, growth potential that we'll never have. I was thinking about both of our futures. Both of our futures? Jake, you've been sabotaging my business for 2 years. You've stolen confidential information, violated client trust, and sold our competitive advantages to our biggest rival. How exactly was that thinking about my future? He leaned forward, and I could see him shifting into the persuasive mode that had charmed so many clients over the years. Listen, this doesn't have to be the end. Henderson would be willing to make you an offer too. Your technical skills, combined with their resources and client base, could be incredibly valuable. We could all come out ahead here. The audacity was staggering. He'd betrayed our partnership, violated every principle we'd agreed to, and now he was trying to recruit me into the same scheme that had destroyed our company. Jake, I need you to listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once. As of this moment, our partnership is dissolved. I want you out of this office within the hour. Take your personal belongings and nothing else. Any company property, client files, or business materials stay here. His expression shifted from persuasive to defensive. You can't just dissolve the partnership unilaterally. We have agreements, legal obligations. I own half of everything here. I slid a copy of our partnership agreement across the table, highlighting a clause we'd included almost as an afterthought 8 years earlier. Section 7.3. Partnership may be dissolved immediately by either party upon discovery of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, or actions detrimental to the business interests of the partnership. Your emails to Henderson constitute all three. He read the clause twice, his face growing paler with each word. We'd added that provision at the suggestion of the lawyer who'd reviewed our template agreement, never imagining it would ever be relevant. Danny, please. Let's talk about this rationally. We've been friends for a decade, partners for 8 years. Surely that counts for something. But as I looked at him sitting across from me, I realized the person I'd considered my best friend had been a fiction for the past 2 years. The Jake I'd trusted implicitly had been systematically betraying that trust while maintaining the facade of partnership and friendship. The real Jake was a stranger who'd calculated that selling out our company was more valuable than honoring the agreements that had made his success possible. The Jake I was friends with would never have done this. I don't know who you are anymore, but you're not the person I started this company with. Jake left that afternoon with a single box of personal items and 8 years of partnership reduced to legal documents and bad memories. I spent the rest of the day calling our lawyer, our accountant, and beginning the process of damage control that would consume the next 3 months of my life. The first priority was assessing which clients Henderson had successfully poached using Jake's intelligence. The answer was devastating. 7 of our 12 biggest accounts had either terminated their contracts or reduced their project scope significantly over the past 18 months. Mountain Peak Brewery, our flagship client, had switched to Henderson after Jake provided them with detailed insights about our pricing structure and creative process. The financial impact was immediate and severe. With Jake gone and 7 major clients lost, our monthly revenue dropped by 60% almost overnight. I had to lay off 8 employees, including Sarah Kim, who'd been with us since the early days. Those conversations were among the hardest I've ever had, explaining to talented, dedicated people that their jobs were ending because of betrayal they'd had nothing to do with. But the personal betrayal hurt more than the business losses. Jake and I had shared everything for nearly a decade: victories, defeats, late-night strategy sessions, family celebrations, personal struggles. He'd been the best man at my wedding, and I'd helped him through his divorce 2 years earlier. The revelation that he'd been deceiving me for 2 years while maintaining that facade of friendship felt like discovering my entire adult life had been built on lies. The legal response was swift and comprehensive. Our lawyer filed complaints with the State Ethics Board, initiated civil proceedings for breach of fiduciary duty, and sent cease and desist letters to both Jake and Henderson and Associates. The evidence was overwhelming: 18 months of documented emails, financial records showing payments from Henderson, and testimony from clients who confirmed they'd received information that could only have come from internal sources. 3 weeks after Jake walked out of our office, he was back, not in triumph, but in desperation. I was working alone in the office on a Saturday morning, trying to rebuild client relationships and save what remained of our business, when he appeared in the doorway looking like he'd aged 5 years in 21 days. "Danny, we need to talk," he said, and his voice carried none of the confidence I'd known for 8 years. I didn't look up from my computer. "Jake, anything you need to say can go through our lawyers. You made your choice when you decided Henderson was more important than our partnership." He moved closer, and I could see his hands shaking. "Henderson threw me under the bus. The State Ethics Board is investigating both of us. They're claiming I acted independently, without their knowledge or authorization. They've terminated my consulting agreement and are threatening to sue me for breach of contract." The irony was almost beautiful. Jake had betrayed our partnership for the promise of a bigger opportunity, and now his new partners were betraying him to protect themselves from legal consequences. "That's unfortunate, but it's not my problem anymore." He sat down across from me, in the same chair where he'd admitted to selling our client information 3 weeks earlier. "Danny, they're pressing criminal charges. Wire fraud, theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty. My lawyer says I could be looking at federal prison time." For the first time since discovering his emails, I stopped working and really looked at him. The confident, charismatic partner I'd known was gone, replaced by someone who looked desperate and defeated. "Jake, you documented everything in writing. You systematically stole confidential information and sold it to our competitor for 18 months. What did you think would happen when this came to light?" I thought I was positioning myself for a better future. Henderson made it sound like a standard industry practice, like everyone was sharing competitive intelligence. They said it was just market research. The naivety was staggering, but also revealing. Jake had always been better at relationships than details, more focused on the big picture than the fine print. It was entirely possible that Henderson had manipulated him into believing his actions were less serious than they actually were. "So what do you want from me?" He leaned forward with something that looked like hope in his eyes. "If you don't press civil charges, it strengthens my criminal defense. My lawyer says the prosecution's case depends partly on demonstrating financial damages to the partnership. If you're not claiming damages..." I sat back in my chair and considered the request. Dropping civil charges wouldn't bring back our clients or restore our partnership, but it might keep Jake out of federal prison. Part of me, the part that remembered 8 years of friendship and partnership, wanted to help him avoid the worst consequences of his choices. But another part of me knew that actions have consequences, and that my responsibility was to the employees who'd lost their jobs, the clients who'd been deceived, and the business I was struggling to rebuild. "Jake, I can't do that. You didn't just betray me personally. You violated the trust of our employees, our clients, and everyone who believed in what we were building together. The legal system exists to address exactly this kind of breach of faith." He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer but needed to hear it confirmed. "I understand. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I was being smart about business, positioning myself for growth opportunities. I never wanted to hurt you or the company. But you did hurt us, Jake. You made calculated decisions for 18 months to put your personal interests ahead of our partnership, our employees, and our clients. The fact that you're now facing consequences doesn't change the choices you made." He stood up slowly, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "For what it's worth, Danny, I am sorry. Not just because I got caught, but because I lost the best friendship and partnership I've ever had. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I wanted you to know." Jake left that morning, and I never saw him again in person. The legal proceedings continued for another 8 months, ultimately resulting in a plea agreement that sent him to minimum security federal prison for 14 months and required him to pay $450,000 in restitution to our partnership and affected clients. Henderson and associates faced their own consequences: a public censure from the State Ethics Board, client defections when the scandal became public, and a federal investigation that ultimately found evidence of systematic competitive intelligence gathering from multiple sources. Richard Henderson himself resigned from the company he'd founded rather than face criminal charges. Rebuilding Morrison Chen Creative, now simply Chen Creative Solutions, took 2 years of grinding work. I had to relocate to a smaller office, rebuild our client base from scratch, and learn to handle both the creative and business development sides of the operation. The process was humbling, exhausting, and occasionally demoralizing. But it was also liberating in ways I hadn't expected. Without Jake's personality dominating client relationships, I discovered I was more capable of business development than I'd realized. Clients appreciated my technical expertise and straightforward communication style. The company I rebuilt was smaller but more sustainable, built on relationships I developed personally rather than inherited through partnership. The experience taught me valuable lessons about trust, verification, and the importance of formal systems even in close relationships. My new partnership agreements include detailed reporting requirements, regular audits, and clear consequences for breaches of fiduciary duty. I learned that friendship and business partnership are related but separate relationships, each requiring different kinds of attention and protection. 3 years later, Chan Creative Solutions employed 12 people and generated $1.8 million in annual revenue. We might not have reached the scale Morrison Creative had achieved, but every dollar was earned honestly, every client relationship was built on trust, and every employee could go to sleep knowing their jobs were secure. The betrayal Jake orchestrated was devastating in the short term, but it ultimately forced me to build something stronger, more sustainable, and entirely my own. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing that happens next. You just have to be willing to do the work of rebuilding from the ground up.